Good morning. I hope that you guys are ready to take a few more notes today. I did include a printable fill-in-the-blank note sheet for you. So if you have access to a printer, you can print those and just fill in the blank. If you don't have access to a printer, I'm sorry, you can sketch these in your notes so that you can have access to them. Today, we're really going to be focused in on that specific part of looking at how we impact our environment and what water pollution is and how it gets into our water systems and what we can do about water pollution. So let's start off by talking about what pollution is. Pollution is any substance that causes an undesirable, unwanted change in the environment that humans do, right? So we create issues and then we have to fix those issues, right? And pollution is an issue. There can be air pollution, there can be water pollution, land pollution. All of those are human activities that cause a detrimental effect to the environment. We're going to talk about two different types of pollution. The first is point source pollution. This type of pollution comes from a single known place, like a factory in the picture. Things like pipes or a sewage outlet, an oil spill. We can pinpoint where the issue came from, right? So point source pollution, we can say we know where it's coming from. Non-point source pollution comes from a source that's not always easy to identify. This is like when we pick up plastic bottles on the side of the road. Do we know who put it there? We don't know, right? We can't identify the source of the pollution. A lot of runoff from agriculture is an example of this. When we were talking about watersheds yesterday, we talked about that runoff from maybe a farm or facility that gets into the waterways. Trash in the ocean is a non-point source pollution. We can't really pinpoint where it's coming from, right? We know there's a variety of places that it comes from. So non-point source pollution doesn't have an easy identifiable target for where we need to fix something. So let's look at a few examples to make sure that we kind of have this understanding of point and non-point source pollution. You notice smoke coming from a smokestack at a local factory. Do you think that is point or non-point pollution? That one's going to be point, right? We have a particular place where we can see that it's coming from. What about we have a puddle with oil in the grocery store parking lot? What do you think? You think that's point or non-point? That's non-point, right? We can't pinpoint exactly where that oil came from. We can assume that it maybe came from a car that was parked there. Could it have come from multiple cars, right? We don't know exactly where it came from. Whoop. At the park, there's trash on the ground. I just showed you guys the answer for that one. That's non-point. We can't pinpoint who put it there, right? We can't list a particular guilty party. So that's going to be non-point source pollution. After a rainstorm, there's dirty water running along the street in town. Do we know where it came from? The rain washed it all into the street, so we don't know where it came from, right? That's going to be non-point source pollution. Thick smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe of a car on the highway. Can we see the source? We can see the source for that one, so we know that that is point source pollution. What about a pipe that's cracked and oil gets spilled onto the land? That has a specific location, right? So see how there's a difference between a specific location that we know we can fix and then kind of a broader category of unknown places, right? Which type do you think is worse, point or non-point solution? Point pollution, blah, blah, blah. Point or non-point pollution, which one is worse? I think that non-point source pollution is worse because we can't pinpoint an exact place where we need to fix. So that makes it a lot harder for us to fix the problem. There are 4 different types of pollutants, and we're going to talk about each one. Sediment, toxic, bacterial, and nutrient pollution. And all of these impact the ecosystems that depend on these waterways for survival. So let's first talk about sediment. Sediment happens when dirt and minerals and sand erode and wash away into the water. And you can see in the picture, there's this huge sediment coming into this water system from a smaller tributary, right? These construction sites If you live in a neighborhood like I do, where there are a lot of construction going on, then you might see that they have these kind of filters put over and barriers on the drains in the neighborhood, and that's to catch all of the runoff from construction sites, because all of that sand and dirt from those construction sites is going to wash into a water system. It's going to clog them. It's going to cause issues, right? Riverbank erosion is also an issue. This happens when we don't have those native plants that grow along the banks of rivers to slow that runoff. So then the water just ends up pushing that soil into the waterway and eroding that riverbank. Mining, logging, these tear up roads, and when the road gets torn up, there's exposed dirt. There's nothing to hold the dirt in place. And so that dirt is then going to wash into that watershed, wherever that watershed empties into that river, stream, or tributary. Why is it a problem? Well, there's several things that can cause issues when we have that sediment pollution. It's going to block sunlight, first of all, for the plants that are providing oxygen for the animals that live there. That also means that they can't grow and provide food for the animals that live there. It's going to clog the gills of different fish and crabs because it's very fine, right? That sand is really, really fine and silty, and so it gets in their gills. Well, if that happens, they can't breathe, and so then they die. It can actually even bury the eggs of insects and fish and keep them from hatching because they are crushed under the weight of the sediment, right? So all of these are problems that can follow down that train, right, to affect the ecosystem. Chemicals. Chemicals are toxic. We know we don't need to go drink bleach out of our bathrooms, right? That's very toxic and dangerous, and we should not do that, right? Chemicals that poison and kill organisms in and near streams and lakes are a type of toxic pollution. These are things like pesticides, oil and gasoline spills, household cleaning products that we use in our houses, paint, industrial waste chemicals that they use in the production of cars or paper or lots of other industries that produce products. All of these are toxic to the environment, right? And all of them are damaging to the environment. Bacterial pollution is a type of pollution that involves bacteria being able to grow in particular areas. This happens for the organisms that live, drink, and swim in the water. Are we organisms that drink the water sometimes? Yes. This happens even in cultures like ours where we have established systems that protect us, because bacterial pollution can get into our water system. If you lost water or were under a water boil notice when the snowstorm happened, that's because they weren't 100% sure that bacteria didn't get into the water system. And so the sources of this can be overflow from sewage treatment facilities, septic system leaks. A lot of people who live farther out in more rural areas have septic systems, tanks that kind of store solid waste and use bacteria to break that waste down. Well, if that leaks into the ground, it can cause a groundwater contamination, right? Animal manure carries lots of bacteria like E. coli that are not good for us, not good for the environment, and can wash into our waterways. Discharge from boat toilets, right? If there's a toilet on a boat and it's not a closed system, it just flushes right into the waterway. That is not going to be good for that particular environment, right? So bacterial pollution can be a big issue for certain areas where there are hazards for humans and for the other organisms that live there. Nutrient pollution. This happens a lot of times when we get too much nitrogen or phosphorus in a particular area. This is a big problem because it sounds like nutrients, that's good, right? Except it's nutrients for algae. And so what happens is the algae blooms and that covers the whole surface of the water, not allowing any water plants underneath that algae to get access to sunlight. Well, then the algae starts to die because there's not enough nutrient for them to be able to survive. Well, as those decomposers start to break them down, it uses up all the oxygen in the water. And so then other organisms like fish and crabs and other things that live underwater don't have the oxygen that they need to survive, right? And so this duckweed and algae overgrowths can have dense layers of scum. They can damage the below surface plants. They can really take all of that oxygen away, that's dissolved oxygen that fish need and crabs need. and crawfish and all of the other organisms that live in the water. And so this can be a huge issue when we're taking care of our farmlands. Some sources of nutrient pollution are fertilizer, again, manure. I know we've talked about this quite a bit, but cow manure is a huge problem for not just freshwater areas, but also saltwater areas, because that manure washes into our ocean and it causes these dead zones where this algae bloom has happened. And then there's areas where fish can't survive because there's not enough dissolved oxygen in the water. So manure is a huge source, because when we flush our poop down the toilet, it goes to a water treatment facility where they put it into a digester with bacteria that break it down. And here in San Antonio, SAWS actually does a really great job of recycling all of the products that are byproducts of our waste, right? So the solid waste goes into these giant digester tanks, and it's broken down by these bacteria. Well, the bacteria produce a gas called methane. Methane, when it's released in the environment, not very good. But when we capture it and we burn it like natural gas, that is a really great way to recycle something that otherwise would be harmful for the environment. So when cows release methane as flatulence, gas, farts, it's bad for the environment because it creates, it causes more greenhouse gases. Methane is a type of greenhouse gas, which increases the radiant temperature of the earth, right? And remember, we talked about how important it is to maintain that homeostasis, and temperature balance is one of those things that helps us maintain that balance. So being able to process and take care of animal manure is just as important as human feces and human solid waste, because it's washing right into the waterways with no treatment. And so that's going to affect organisms that live in these environments. So I hope that helps you kind of understand a little bit about that nutrient pollution. Remember, we talked about this word eutrophication, and this is how we classify water bodies when they get excess nutrients that stimulate too much plant growth. And you can see in this picture that bright green water is because of too many nutrients in the water that's causing that excessive plant growth, which is good for the plants for a minute. And then as those plants decompose, the decomposers suck up all the oxygen that's in the water, and it deprives the organisms that live there of oxygen. So I hope that helps you guys understand a little bit more about point and non-point source pollution and the different types of pollution that we can have. When we try to control our effect on the environment by controlling our sources of pollution, it's always a great thing. So I hope you guys have a great day.